All right, welcome back to another one of our season previews. Today we'll be talking about the Washington Capitals, two of our beloved favorite NHL teams. Harry, we'll get to you later down the road. No Penguins talk today, but happy to have my dad, Mike Vogel, on the show, senior writer for the Washington Capitals. Thanks for joining, Dad.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So I think obviously the hot button issue that everyone wants to know about the Caps is, this team kind of clawed their way into a playoff spot last year with as mediocre of a season as we had, and then we've made a lot of moves in the offseason. Definitely coming back with a team that looks a good bit different than the one we had last season. So I think the big question is kind of what can we expect from guys like PL Dubois, smaller additions like Radish and Duhaime. We'll see how that plays out, but obviously a new goalie tandem now.
Yeah.
And, other questions like what's Oshie's deal and whatnot. Where should we start, fellas?
Let's go with the additions. I feel like they made a couple big
Yeah.
splashes. Everyone wants to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you got four new forwards, two new defensemen, and a new goaltender. So they didn't leave any position untouched, really. Seven new players. That's a third of the roster, essentially, right there. So it is going to be a different looking team. Honestly, you guys saw a ton of every team's games last year, but if you watch the Caps, you know that their chief struggle was scoring for most of the season. So I feel like the additions of Dubois, Mangiapane, and to a lesser extent Radish are going to help the offense. But I think also adding Matt Roy and Jeff Chikrin to the back end are going to do the same thing. And if you think about, for me, it's pretty hard to add two top four defensemen in the same offseason. And the Caps, to me, have done it three times. Notably, they may have done it other times, but I don't think so. And you go back to Langway and Engblom in 1982. That changed. That's essentially the reason we're having this conversation now, is because the Caps would have moved somewhere else if that trade hadn't happened. And then 10 years ago, Niskanen and Orpik from Pittsburgh to Washington. 4 years later, there's a Stanley Cup. So that was a significant add as well. And now you're adding Chikrin and Roy. So for me, the two of those guys are both strong two-way defensemen. Both can play on the power play. Both Roy kills penalties. But they both, you got one guy on the right side and Roy, guy on the left side, and Chikrin. I think you're going to spend less time in your own end futzing around with those two guys. And they're also going to help fuel the attack. And for me, the best thing the Caps can do as a group this year is just spend more time in the offensive zone and less time in the D zone. I think they finished 26th in the league in possession at even strength last year, and you're just asking a lot of your goaltending. So I feel like I think they addressed the major issue, which is scoring more goals. But I think quietly they've also made this a better team, and I think it's pretty significant what they've been able to do over the course of the last decade or so, just bringing in young and talented players who, for whatever reason, it didn't work out in the other organization or other organizations that they were in. Guys like TJ Oshie, Nick Dowd, Nick Jensen, Lars Eller, over the years, Brett Connolly, they've really managed to get the best years out of these guys, and a lot of them have re-signed and stayed here. And so if you're able to get a guy like Chikrin to do that, he's in a contract year this year, just looking ahead, at some point, John Carlson is going to start fading. It hasn't really happened yet, but at some point, he's got 2 years left on his contract. You're going to need that fixture of a top pair defenseman who can do everything that a top pair defenseman should do: play power play, PK, play against other teams' top opponents. That's the hardest piece for me, for any team to find, is that number one stud defenseman. Not every team has one of those guys. And so if you're able to identify a guy that you can get in here and make him that guy, I think that's a big add. So for me, Chikrin is the piece that has the potential to be long term the biggest. That's also true for Dubois though, because he's already obviously signed for the next 7 seasons. And for me, that the deal that the Kemper for Dubois deal is kind of a deal of convenience for both teams. Both teams had needs that could be filled by the guy they were getting, and both teams were a little bit disappointed with what they got from the guy they were moving out. So it was just kind of a deal of convenience, I think, for both teams. But I also believe that the Caps got the best player in the trade, and typically that's the team that wins the trade. And the other thing is, yeah, Kemper only has 3 years left, and Dubois has 7, but even at the end of those 7 years, Dubois will still be younger then than Kemper is now. So I like the dice rolls that they made with each and every one of the signings that they made. You know, they're the odds of making 7 additions and having them all work out are pretty slim. But if you can get 5 of these guys, 4 or 5 of them to have good years and maybe a couple of good years, they should be in good shape to be at least competitive for the last couple of years of Ovechkin's contract. And hopefully there won't be a painful sort of afterburn from that, you know, whenever he decides to hang him up and you don't have that draw, that one drawing card. They're not starting from scratch. They've done a good job of kind of rebuilding the farm system the last few drafts, adding picks, and I think they've been really good at taking what the salary cap would give them, which wasn't much for the last 8 or 9 years, but now the shackles are coming off a little bit, and you're seeing that they're taking full advantage of it.
Yeah, I like what you said too about like guys that maybe haven't had a great tenure somewhere else or are coming off of a down year, and us kind of taking a flyer and hoping that we can kind of turn things around. Saw it happen with Strome, Milano, you know, kind of tried to make it happen with Ethan Bear and guys like that. But I mean, I think PL Dubois and Chikrin both had arguably their worst season last season. And so it's definitely a little bit of a question mark of like, what version of these guys are we going to get? What are we going to be able to get out of them? Another guy I'm curious about kind of your opinion on is McMichael. I think we saw him take a really good step forward last year. I think he ended up with 18 goals or something like that. What do you expect to see from him this year?
I think you could slot him into that 3C role that Lars was so effective at for half a decade or so, where you can ask Connor to play against a top 6 line on the other team, give you some offense, kill some penalties, deliver somewhere in that 35 to 40, 45 point range too, because you know, he's got a good enough shot that he can score some goals. He's creative enough to make some plays. He gets so many chances. If he could finish a higher percentage of the chances that he gets, he could and he's still young, that he's still young enough that may come for him. I think there's still some upside to his game, but for me, he's better in the middle of the ice than on the left side. And I think Hendrix Lapierre is also better in the middle of the ice, a bit better in the middle of the ice, but I think Lappy gives you a little bit more on the wing. And I think you could see some mix and match depending on opponents. I think you could see maybe Hendrix in the middle one night, Connor another night. But I think for me, I think you're going to see Dubois and Strome, obviously top 2 there as your 2 top 6 centers.
Looking at goaltending for a second, you know, obviously in the deal, the Caps free up the $5 million and change that was held up by Kemper in the salary cap, and then they bring in a guy under $1 million like Logan Thompson, who both him and Lindgren had 25 wins last year. What does that do to that goaltending tandem? Do you think that improved it?
That's hard to say. I think Logan Thompson can have a better year than Kemper had last year. Certainly. I think he's capable of that. I think the jury's out on what the the tandem is going to be as a whole. I have belief in both of these guys. They're both non-drafted goaltenders, and the Caps are the team that has been kind of the goaltending. They've supplied more goaltenders than they drafted more goaltending games than any other team in the league since 1989. So they've done a really good job of identifying, drafting, and developing goaltenders.
You could go down the list of NHL
now.
teams right now that have goalies that played for the Caps at some point.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, there's that too. They're scattered all over the league, and so it's such an unpredictable position. Now you see, a kid Askarov from Nashville asking to be traded before he's essentially established himself. Now he's a former first-round pick, but we've seen that doesn't really matter with goaltenders. And you can go back and look at the history of goaltenders who were drafted high in the draft. I feel like half of them pan out, half of them don't. So I don't think there's a stigma, or there shouldn't be a stigma to having an undrafted goaltender or goaltenders who, are taken late in the draft either. I think that as long as you've got guys who are sound, as far as their technique and everything, and you have a belief in their ability to stop the puck, man, I think you're in good shape. And the Caps go 4 deep now in undrafted goaltenders, if you want to include Clay Stevenson and Hunter Shepard. And you watch Hunter Shepard, he's pretty unorthodox. He does not look like a lot of goaltenders that you watch, but he gets the job done. He stops pucks. I think that you're going to be hard pressed to find a team that's going to spend less on their goaltending this year than the Caps. Now I would expect too to see a little bit of Shepard and a little bit of Clay Stevenson, because Lindgren and Thompson both in contract years this year. So both guys are going to have incentive to be really good this year, because they both want to get paid. They both want to have the security of a multi-year contract coming down the road. And the Caps are in a good spot where they've got essentially 4 guys who are going to be auditioning for next season's roster, essentially starting 2 weeks from now when training camp gets underway. The other interesting wrinkle is that both of these guys are right-handed catching goaltenders. So it's been a long time since a team has gotten, say, 70 plus starts out of right-handed catching goalies. And I'm pretty sure it would have been the St. Louis Blues back in the mid 90s when Grant Fuhr started. Like, I don't know what it was. When Mike Keenan was coaching the Blues, Grant Fuhr, who was at the tail end of his career then and was definitely past his prime, but he started, I want to say 74, 75 games.
Wow.
For St. Louis that year. Because Keenan just every night just wrote his name on the card, put him out there.
That's phenomenal that you just said that, because I was literally about to ask you, I can't recall. Has there ever been a tandem that you can remember where both are southpaws, if you will?
It's somebody. One of our old video coach, Timmy Ohashi, who works for Seattle now, actually texted me after the trade and said, "You're probably on top of this, but just in case you don't, there was an instance in Colorado within the last 5 years where they had Francouz and Michael Hutchinson play in the same game, but I think it was the only game that Hutch played that year too. So it's a pretty rare thing. I honestly can't recall the last time that there were 2 righties on the same team for any appreciable period of time. I think there's, if I remember right, there's only a little over 100 of these guys in the history of the game. And Logan Thompson, with just over 100 games, is already like 25th or so on the list. There's a ton of guys who are right-handed catching goalies who only played 1 or 2 games in their entire career.
Wow. Interesting. My question for you, it's not a Cap season preview if we don't talk about Ovi, obviously. Last year, I feel like at the beginning of the year, there were questions about the record and, everyone was like, what's going on? And then he turned it up at the second half of the season. The Caps had problems scoring some goals last year, but like you said, they've made some some moves this offseason. How do you see Ovechkin performing this season? Like, where do you think he gets stat wise?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say because, like you said, last year the start was slow, and you're halfway through the season and he's still in single digits, and you're like, ooh, this is pretty ugly. And then he got on one of his patented heaters, and it lasted a couple of months there at the end where he, got it up to 30, which is a pretty customary. I don't see any reason why he couldn't hit 30 again. I'd say he's going to come in somewhere between 30 and 40. That's my gut hunch right now. But we'll see. I mean, you know what? He just didn't look right, honestly. Early last season, his hands didn't look right, his feet didn't look right, and it wasn't until probably January that started to come around. So I think a lot may depend on just how he looks and feels coming in. He's going to be. This is season 20 coming up. He'll be 39.
September, right?
Yeah, less than a month from now. So, I think he had what 31 last year. I put him a little above that because I think the team around him a little better. I think he's going to get a couple more good looks on the power play. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how the personnel shakes out. See who he's playing with. Who his line mates are going to be, and they've got some good options on that in that regard too. But yeah, I can see him. I'd say he should come in between 25 and 40, but I'd say more narrowly between 30 and 35.
Looking at the departures for a second, a guy like Beck Malenstein, whose physicality and compete level I thought was top tier last year. Obviously, there's going to be a hole left in the lineup when a guy like that leaves. Obviously, he goes over to Buffalo. What does someone like Duhaime or Radish do to sort of fill that role here for the Caps?
I think Duhaime's the guy that's going to fill that role. And I think they got, I mean, you're exactly right. Everything you said about Malenstein's exactly correct. And it was really good. For me, it was rewarding to see him blossom into a full-time NHL player, penalty killer, fourth line crash and bang winger last year. Because, just watching him develop, you kind of had the sense that he had that in him. So it was good to see him. He overcame a lot to get there. But anytime someone comes to you, 8 years down the road from you're drafting a guy in the 5th round, and he essentially is what he is. He's a fourth line player, really good one, really good penalty killer, great team guy. There's a lot to like about his game. But if someone's going to come and offer you a 2nd round pick for that guy, that essentially got them Cole Hudson. They essentially traded Malenstein for Cole Hudson, and you'll make that trade every day of the week. It's easier to find a guy like Beck Malenstein than it is to find that chip that you can roll the dice with, who could come. We talked about it a little bit earlier, who could morph into a top 4 defenseman somewhere down the road, or a guy who can play on your power play. He's got a lot of skill. I think you do that all day long, but I think you're going to like Duhaime's game too. He's got a lot of the elements that Malenstein has to his game. Can kill penalties. For me, he's a little bit more of a he's a little bit more along the lines of Hathaway, where he's going to be.
He's a big body, isn't he? A bigger dude.
I wouldn't say he's bigger, but he plays that. That's just his style. For me, Malenstein was never a guy who was going around looking for trouble, but he was always going to finish every hit. He was clean, but by the end of games, he would irritate some guys just because he was finishing every hit. You see it happen. But for me, Duhaime is a little bit more of an irritant, a little bit more of a guy that, if it took Malenstein until the 3rd period to tick you off, this guy will get it done a little bit earlier in the game, I think.
You think the Caps are a playoff team? We were just finishing up a previous season preview, and we were talking about the East, and maybe some Atlantic teams could be wild card contenders, but Carolina maybe a little weaker this year. Where do you see the Caps landing?
It's hard to say. I think they'll be in the mix. I think they'll be in the hunt for a spot. They should be. I mean, for me, they look like a better team on paper than they were last year, and I think would they sneak in with 91, 93 points, some really low number. I could see him threatening 100 points with this team if they get the goaltending. And I think, like I said earlier, I think one of the things that's going to help them goaltending wise is they're not going to spend as much time. They shouldn't spend, if all things being equal, you never know how things play out until, on paper is one thing, on the ice is another, but they should be a better team possession wise. They should spend less time in their own end if everyone's healthy, reasonably healthy, and they don't get too dinged up with injuries. I like what they did in the offseason, and I think they'll be in the hunt, and I think that's all you can ask for in this league, unless you're a loaded team like Edmonton or someone that you can tell going in is going to be a legitimate. Florida again is going to be legitimate possibility for the conference final. You're just hoping to get in and make some noise, and I think this year's, as you said, Mac, at the beginning, they got in last year, but barely, and under just absolutely bizarre circumstances, and not just the last game where she scores an empty netter in a tie game to essentially push them in. It was the last 2 months that were crazy, with all the teams that had a chance and couldn't grasp it, and the Caps were just sort of left with the last chair at the end. And honestly, going in, they probably didn't have much of a chance against the Rangers, but you got to like the fact that guys like McMichael and LaPierre, Alexeyev got a taste of what Stanley Cup playoff hockey is all about. They won't go in this year not knowing what to expect because they've already experienced it.
I think the only other question I have for you is, out of the staples that were here last year, is there a player that you're looking at specifically to take another step forward this year? I know you mentioned McMichael earlier. Anyone else jump to mind for who you're looking for a little bit more out of this year?
Well, for me, I look at a couple of guys who played. One guy who played really well last year, and another guy who just didn't had a tough year. And I'm talking about Milano and Ethan Bear. I thought Sonny, when he was healthy, was really fun to watch and exciting, unpredictable, and really a better than advertised player defensively too. And so, especially when you look, Mac and I had this conversation the other night. In the last, essentially since the trade deadline in 2020. Milano has the 11th best shooting percentage in the NHL. So if you get him a little more ice, and look, all the ice he gets these days, he got a little bit of power play time when he first came to Washington, but he's been mostly a 5-on-5 guy last season. But honestly, for me, he's got enough skill to play on the power play, second unit. He's been, I thought he was one of the better guys at getting the puck into the zone when they struggled on entries. Milano was a guy that they could lean on to kind of break that cycle a little bit. And then Ethan Bear, got himself injured at the World Championships the year before, which is the whole reason that he went unsigned the rest of the summer. Nobody knew kind of what to expect with his rehab. He had a shoulder surgery, was out for about 6 months. People started watching him work out. Caps were impressed. They went out, signed him. But I think we see it all the time. It's really hard to catch moving train when you try to jump in a lineup in January. Everyone else had a full training camp. Everyone else got 30 some games under their belt. It's pretty impossible. He got a couple of games in where he looked pretty sharp early, and I think it was a lot of adrenaline, and then seemed like things kind of caught up with him a little bit. But I think he's a good kid, and I think there's a good hockey player in there too. So I just don't know where the ice time's going to come for him, because they're pretty loaded back there. You're looking at 4 righties and four lefties. I mean, I feel bad for Alex Alexeyev, because I thought each of the last 2 years he had a really strong last quarter of the season, and they blocked him by bringing in Joel Edmondson last summer, and then this year they had Chikrin, and that kind of pushes him down. Now you're looking at that left side is honest to me, is really strong when you're looking at either having Sandin or Ferravari probably playing on your third pair, and Big Al's going to be, you know, it's going to be hard for him to get in the lineup again, and Bear too, for that matter. But I think that there's more upside to Bear's game for sure than we saw last year.
All right. Well, final thoughts, Dad. You said you think they'll be in the hunt. I think my official prediction, I would agree with that. I think they'll be right there. I'm going to go ahead and say they sneak into the playoffs again. I think they have a much better chance to win around this year than they did last year. That's all I'll say. I'll leave it there. Whether they will or not depends on who they draw, obviously. But
yeah, I would agree with that too. I think they'll just be, I think there was a little bit of, man, that was something that we got in. Hey, credit to the Rangers too. They were a really good team, and the Caps, they just couldn't sustain any kind of momentum at any point in that series. They get a lead or they get a little bit of feel good, and it just didn't last more than a couple of minutes of game time. And you get an experienced team like the Rangers that can do that to you, and they can just control the game, control the puck, control the play. Like you said, I think they'll be readier, and if they finish a little higher, they should have a more favorable draw as well.
One last thing, just I feel like everyone's big question coming into this year is 19 and 77. Just your thoughts on them?
Well, I don't think, to me, it doesn't sound like Nicky's going to play, which I don't think is a surprise. With the Osh, I know he's been trying to find a way, or I think the word he used was a solution that would allow him to play. I don't think he wants to go through what he went through the last couple of years, and I'm totally understandable of that too. So I think with him, it's going to be whenever he shows up and takes the ice and has that physical. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see where he's at, and if there's anything that they've managed to find between him and the medical staff. I'm sure they've left no stone unturned. I know how badly he wants to continue to play, but honestly, he wrung more out of that 8-year contract than I thought he was going to do when he signed it. That guy left everything he ever had out on the ice. So kudos to him. But I'd love to see him. I'd love to see him even play 50 or 60 games again. But I don't think he wants to go through that again.
I think that's all the questions we have for you, boys. Are you good?
Yep, I'm all set. Thanks.
Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely.